Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay after all this microphone fiddling? So my name is Anna McIntyre, like Richard said. I do a lot of things in research and graduate studies. The one thing that I wanted to talk about today is something that's happening 2 weeks from tomorrow, and that is the Student Research Symposium. It's part of Research Week. We'll have about 250 of you presenting your posters. This event is almost as old as I am, but in the past few years, some of the things that we have done is really try and make it not just a CV line item, not just putting up some poster boards and giving you some pins so it exists and is hung up somewhere, but really turning it into a training opportunity so that as you attend academic conferences in your disciplines, that you can go out and do the best that you can do in your presentations. Last month we did oral presentations, so this month we're focusing on academic posters. And I think that this is something that sometimes is overlooked. If you go to a conference, sometimes I feel like the goal is, oh, I just want my poster to fit in. And that's not really the goal of what you should want. You should want to be able to stand out as something exceptional. You want your research to be accessible to anyone who would be perusing all of the many posters that would be at your academic discipline. If it's a judged competition, you would want to be make sure that you're able to communicate the crux of your research very well. In the past, what we've done is we've focused a lot on the principles of good poster and slide design. And over the past few years, if there's one thing that's been a feedback note, we've had more requests of, yeah, that's all good and fine, but how do you do it? How do you what buttons do you push in PowerPoint or wherever to be able to make the changes that you know are going to make a better poster? Last year we rolled out this paper that's in front of you. It is a matrix, and that really focuses a little bit on the main principles, but with the how, we're going to talk about how do we make our posters efficiently, how do you save time, how do you make them look good, and how do you make them, most importantly, be able to effectively tell your story so that you can get the point and the main results of your research across to whoever it is that you might be conversing with. So we're just going to touch on this very briefly. Last year we did a whole workshop on all of these, my top 32 things of what are good design principles for academic posters and slides. But essentially, I broke this out into 4 separate elements along with 4 separate goals with 2 items in each of those parts of the matrix. And so the elements that we're going to be focusing on include words, data, images, and layout. And each of those areas, each of those elements has 4 different goals. They go from critical goals to achieve to ones that are less important but still great for a really, really good poster. And so those goals include making sure that our poster is coherent, then efficient, interesting, and also has style. So today we're going to put this matrix to work, and I'm going to show you exactly how I'd go about applying these principles to 2 posters, real posters, that students are working on for this year's Student Research Symposium. I'll walk you through step by step my thought and evaluation process and how I actually make those changes and the edits in PowerPoint itself. Before we get started though, before we jump into it, I want to recognize our 2 students whose examples I'm using today. It's not an easy thing to open yourself up to a public critique like this. They're both great researchers and great sports, and for them to volunteer to do this has been a real help to me, and I hope is a help to you as well. So our first poster makeover is going to be for Hannah Taylor, and she is a student in the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry. Before we get started on doing Hannah's poster makeover, she's going to come up and explain a little bit about her poster, which is on CRISPR-Cas adaptive defense systems.
So how it works is that DNA from viruses are infected into bacterial cells, and the bacterial cells have certain proteins that are able to take a piece of that DNA and put it into their own genome, but in a specific place that is good for the bacteria to have. And then the bacteria can use that DNA to go back and find DNA in the cell that belongs to that virus, and then it's able to cut that DNA. So it's just a way for the bacteria to identify viral DNA so that it can kill it before the virus is able to kill the cell. And so this panel down here talks about Cas9, which is probably the part of CRISPR that most of you have heard about. And Cas9 is used a lot as a genome editing tool and is helping to cure a lot of diseases. So they're developing a lot of drugs with Cas9. This panel here shows how diverse CRISPR systems are. So each line of those is a different CRISPR system, and this is only a subset of the CRISPR systems. And I also wanted to point out that this line right here is kind of all alone, and it hasn't been studied a lot. And that's the type of CRISPR system that I am going to be studying. And so this panel shows a little bit of what I do. And it's basically just cloning and doing expression tests so that I can get the protein into the lab that makes up the CRISPR system so that I can study it. This panel up here outlines X-ray crystallography, which is one of the methods that we want to use once we get protein in the lab. And then this panel here just outlines some of the projects and research questions that we're trying to answer.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I should also mention is I have not spoken to Hannah before like 5 seconds ago. So I was looking at this poster without any background on what her research is, and so that's kind of what I was going off of. And this, what I'm going to be doing is showing you it really is an extreme makeover. I'm not suggesting that everyone do everything that I could do, but if I were putting out the best poster that I could put together, these are the things that I would do as I look at Hannah's poster. So the first thing, and I'm going to be referring back to this matrix a couple times to kind of say, okay, what am I fixing? What am I looking at? What am I trying to address? So the first thing that I look at Hannah's poster is I think that it could do better with a little bit more white space. I think one thing that we don't realize is that this space without stuff on it is just as important as the space with stuff on it. And it's not, it doesn't do you a lot of good to kind of fudge the margins and say, oh, I really want to fit on an extra few words, so I'm going to have half an inch of margin instead of a full inch of margin. So that was the first thing I did. One of the reasons that we don't do well with margins and alignment is because PowerPoint makes it hard for us to do that. If you're in Word or in InDesign or in Publisher, you can say, I want these margins, I want this many columns, and it automatically makes it happen. For PowerPoint, it doesn't do that. You have to put the guides in yourself, and you have to adjust it based on the teeny little bit of numbers that it tells you, and you have to do the math to figure out where to put those. So I've added 1.5-inch margins for Hannah's poster, and so that's the first thing that I did. Then I had to do the math to figure out how wide each of the columns need to be if I have 1-inch gutters between them. And so that's something that I went through, put those together so I could have 4 columns the way Hannah had it, but have a little bit more breathing space around the edges and between those columns. It takes a little bit of time, but it is well worth it spending the time because everything else becomes much easier to create alignment and make things look like they're going in selected columns. So that was the first thing that I did. The next thing that I looked at is so on Hannah's original one, she has a gradient background that goes from dark to light down at the bottom. Based on some things that I wanted to do for the layout, it makes sense to have a background that's all the same color. Luckily, that's a simple fix. You just right-click on the background, say you want to change your background color, and instead of choosing a gradient, just select your color of choice. And that was the simple fix. And once we go down to the bottom of the column, you'll see why that is helpful. Another thing that I did was then I just started nudging things into, so we have that white space. And this is pretty simple. It's a little bit time consuming, but it doesn't take too long to just put things in the space. The one thing that I can start to see already is to create that white space, you do have to make sacrifices on the content. And those are necessary sacrifices. I really think that it is worth your time. you've already made sacrifices. You have your theses, you have your dissertations, you have your published articles, and you have cut down already. You're not plastering all 100 pages of your thesis on here, so you've already done that. You just have to go a little bit more to make sure that this is optimized for a 2-minute conversation with someone who might be passing by. So, are we done with that? So then the next thing that I did is, this was another simple fix and just one that I was just going after low-hanging fruit. You'll notice on Hannah's poster, she has a Utah State logo that just has a white background, and it kind of just sits on top of the poster. To integrate it, I used a white version of the logo with a clear background, so that's a PNG file instead of a JPEG file, and it sits on there a lot better, and it looks like it doesn't create an extra little jutting out thing that sticks out. It allows your body to have one whole rectangle. Okay, now it starts to go to the tough part. We know that we've got to pull some stuff out to maintain that white space, and so I'm going through and I'm starting to read the text on Hannah's poster.
Trying to reduce text length and complexity, formatting it to make it as readable as possible. So the largest group of text that we see is in the introduction. It's one long paragraph. The first thing that I did was read through and tried to create much smaller paragraphs where each paragraph only includes a single idea. It makes it a lot easier to be able to read and understand what is going to be going on in the introduction. The next thing that I decide to do is it really is important to increase your font size as much as possible. Generally, we recommend at least 32-point font size. One thing that I do here is some people, they really struggle with doing short paragraphs because you have to have so much space between the individual paragraphs. But if you go into your font settings or your paragraph settings, you can adjust the amount of leading that you have after each individual paragraph, so you don't have to use a full space for those. The next thing that I did is I started taking a look at Hannah's images and data. One thing that I think that I saw right away was the need to simplify by deleting extra information on the poster herself. We have this image right here, which looks really interesting. It looks really good, but the more that I started reading about Hannah's research, the less relevant it was to exactly what Hannah was working on. This is a reprint of an image that was included in Nature Reviews Microbiology, and only really that a single line of this is particularly relevant to what Hannah does. So I started reading a lot about what would be relevant, what wouldn't, and what would make sense, and see if there were other resources out there. And I found this table, and rather than use a figure, even though it was pretty, I copied and pasted this table in here. And I tried to do a few different variations to see what would make the most sense and what would include the most relevant information and data. And what I realized is really what Hannah needed was just a list of the different classes of cases and the different types, and then the signature proteins that define each of those. And it turns out that all of that actually can fit in a fairly small space. We don't have to use the main, most prominent 30% to showcase all of the different types of CRISPR-Cas systems. And so rather than, I tried using a table, and a table would be a great way to make it work. I'm showing two different variations here. This one is using just a simple text box to be able to display those. And rather than using a table, it can be much easier to just set tabs to be able to put as much text in there as possible while still keeping it clean and aligned and having it make sense. Lots of people won't use tabs because they feel like it's always too wide, but if you go into your paragraph settings again, you can change your tabs to only take up the space that it needs, and you do that by putting in your default tab stops, which I'm doing right here. And now all of the tab stops for this text box are set in this particular format, so they have very small tabs. As I went going through, I realized that they were just a little bit too small, and you see that they tab out a little bit, but I just go back to my paragraph settings, I change it to 0.75 inches, and all of a sudden everything fits. Now, this is not a good use of this particular column, so I actually turned this text into 2 columns, and that's another thing that you can do with a text box. One thing that I found out is it's by default, another thing that's a problem with PowerPoint is it does not make it easy for you to make 2 equal length columns. It actually took me a second. I looked it up on the internet to figure out what was going on, and it's just a simple setting in your format pane. You just want to go to your options and make sure that the auto fit is not set for PowerPoint, and as soon as you do that, you can make 2 equal columns, which is easy to read but still makes great use of the space so that Hannah has more room to build out the research that she's actually doing. So once I had that set up, I just copied again for both types of CRISPR-Cas systems, and I made headings. And you could use a table if you wanted to. I just wanted to show a couple different ways to do this, but that is what we put together. And you'll see this just finish up as I try and make text that is appropriately spaced, has some color to set it out. I highlight the CRISPR-4 system, which is what Hannah was talking about in her explanation of what her research focused on. So next, I want to optimize the graphs by remaking them in a custom template format. So you'll notice this last diagram, it was just a reprint of another image that Hannah had seen. And we're going to do the same thing to simplify the diagrams that she has. Instead of reusing them, making them again. And additionally, as we do that, we're addressing a whole lot of different issues that Hannah has with her poster. It will help make the flow of the poster a lot better. It'll make it really easy to understand the steps and processes that she's going through for her research itself. So this is Hannah's main research explanation. You'll notice a couple things that are challenging with being able to understand what Hannah's doing. First of all, you have these 4 steps: 1, amplify gene; 2, cloning; 3, transformation; and 4, expression and purification. The first issue is that they don't go in a logical order. Your eye has to start on the right side, which it normally doesn't, work backwards towards the left, down to transformation, and then to expression and purification. And that's so she could fit it all on the page, but by remaking these images, we can make that a little bit easier. The second thing that's challenging is that the explanation of all these steps are included as footnotes at the bottom of Hannah's diagram. And so that's something that we can fix to make sure that you don't have to have your eye going from the bottom to the top and the top to the bottom to put those 2 things together. Here we see the same issues and the same things. 1, 2, 3, 4, not in a linear order with the captions down at the bottom, where you have to go back and forth to be able to correlate what's actually happening with the diagrams that Hannah included. So what I'm working on is making this, which is really what I feel is the main part of Hannah's poster, make the most sense and have the most dominance, visual dominance and placement dominance on her poster. And so the first thing that I'm doing is really making it clear what her 4 steps are doing with her cloning work and her project that she's doing. Rather than just blowing up existing images that someone else made, I'm actually taking the time to remake these in PowerPoint. And it's not that hard, especially when you know the tools to use. So I'm just making some simple arrows, and rather than having to line each one up, I can just use the align tool and the distribute tool to get them all centered on top of each other and then spaced out with equal spacing between them. So additionally, when I do that, I can use the text and colors that are already being used in my poster so they look like they belong. So I'm making a caption that has the same text of these different genes that that Hannah is focusing on. And so as I remake those, I just put them right over top of the image that has already been made. I zoom in here so you can see just a little bit better. I align them and then I distribute them and put them right under the arrows. At At that point, we don't need this one. We can move that a little bit out of the way, and we can make these with colors that match the color palette that we already want to use on our poster. I take off the shadow, add a line that's the same color as our background, make sure it's visible, and then change the colors to colors that we would want to use. And those are just pre-existing colors in our color palette. I make a background, and one thing that you'll notice about this particular shape that we're using for the background is that it's one that we reuse over and over throughout this process, and so that ties them all together even though that they started as images from different sources. So we've done step one, and now we're going to work on moving the caption up towards that step one. So I cut that out of the caption and move it up right under the step. And that way, that allows the reader to view this poster in a linear order. They just have to go from top to bottom, and they don't have to go back and forth between the caption down at the bottom and the image up at the top. And I'm starting to set all of these, and I'm going to repeat these font colors and sizes for each individual step so they will all match together. So we're going to the next step, which is going to be creating our step two. So I recreate that same text so it will be the same size, the same color. And there are different ways you can do this. I'll show you a couple different ways to accomplish that. So I pull the caption. Now it's the same spacing that it was with the first step. And I'm using a paintbrush tool to copy the same font color, font size, font settings so that they match. I can delete that. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to also remake this image that Hannah pulled from another source. And it's really, really easy and useful to be able to just simply remake this in PowerPoint. One reason that that's nice is you'll be able to use these especially for your most important images that you're going to use over and over. You can put this in a oral presentation, PowerPoint slides. As you change your poster, you can change the colors very simply, and you can change the way that it's ordered so that it doesn't take, so that it always looks like it matches whatever it is that you're putting in your poster. And this is just simply a matter of using shapes, changing their colors, changing their lines, changing whether there is a shadow behind them or not, and then aligning them up. It is a little bit time consuming. I don't necessarily recommend doing this for every single image or figure that you have, but for ones that you know that you're going to be reusing over and over again, it really does make a lot of sense to spend the time once so that you have them again and again to be able to use. I added text inside this shape, which matches what exists in the other one. I don't have the science background to know exactly what I'm getting right or wrong, but this is a fairly straightforward diagram and image, and makes it easy just to replicate in some way that makes sense. So the thing that's nice about this is you'll see between the original image and this new image that most of the elements are simply repeated elements. So as I create just the initial blue rectangle and the orange circle, I can start just copying and pasting these out. I don't have to redraw each individual one. I just take the time to go through and copy and paste additional labels, additional parts of the image. And now all of these are able to be changed with their spacing, changed with their sizing. So if there's parts that you want to isolate, only list different parts of the image, or make some parts larger or smaller, you have complete control to be able to do that now. Here is a donut shape that we're utilizing to create this assembled vector. And then we're doing another one on top. Now, one thing that's really a nice thing to know is that you have these pre-made images in PowerPoint, but you also have the opportunity to edit them down to any individual point. So in one of these images, the circle has some jagged edges. And you can make that simply by editing the points and then adding different points and then dragging them around. Any single shape, you can do that too. So you can make whatever changes you want. If you want to make a square into a trapezoid, or add a little, add something that would be an outline that would be congruent with an existing image that you already have. It's really, really simple to do, and most people don't realize that that's something that you can do in PowerPoint. You don't have to take it out into Photoshop or Illustrator or some other graphic design tool to be able to make that happen. So once we've added those in, we have a fully remade image. We've been able to enlarge the text to make it readable. We've been able to make every single part editable so that we can change however we want to place it or change it. And you'll see that I'm going to switch the order of those around to make it fit in the poster a little bit better now that we have the opportunity to do that. So moving on next, I wanted to show, if you did want to make edits outside of PowerPoint, how easy it is. So this one, normally I might delete a little bit of that information out of, but I want to show the linkages between the diagram we just made and the detail that's shown here. So I copy and paste the diagram, the shape that we just made, to copy the colors, and then I just use a paint bucket to fill in those areas of commonality. Sometimes you have to look and see the best way to fill those in, and you can adjust your tolerances to make it so it doesn't overflow outside of the lines. So I go and I use my eyedropper to choose the orange color. I go back and fill my paint bucket in, and now this matches the orange that is in our original diagram. Now this is something that you can do if you don't want to remake a full image for which you don't have the editable version of, but that you may want to have some correlation and have something that shows closely to something that you've already put together. And it's a quick fix, and it helps out to show the parallel between the two. Now you can just save that and bring it back into our poster.
All right, so here's one thing that I like about this is I want to create a modular layout. I want this section number 3 to be a square. So I can cut this diagram so it goes in 2 columns and it has a relationship there, and all of a sudden it makes things a lot easier for fitting things up into things that look like puzzle pieces that fit together. And then I was able to add labels on them to say 1, 2, 3, so you know which way to navigate in that section. So that's another reason that it makes sense to remake your diagrams. Okay, I continue to do that, and I do the exact same thing with steps 3 and steps 4. And it's really just a matter, now that I have my text styles chosen, I just copy and paste those same versions. One thing that if you are trying to make text exactly the same and you don't want to select everything, is you can use your format brush, which you saw me do for a second, to find all of the text styles and apply it to any text box that you want. And we just continue and move forward with that. Put those in place. Now I've made space down at the bottom for the X-ray crystallography section. And I do almost the exact same thing. You move the title down, move those spaces, turn those spaces into the orange header, add the captions and move them next to those header spaces, and put the pictures in. And so it didn't take that long to do. I think maybe, hearing Hannah's stuff, I might even try to dedicate more space to this particular section. Okay, so all the last little bit that we do is just, this is the easy stuff, it's just text. And so we're just making it fit. One thing that I was really happy to do was to try and make these columns line up right here, and that makes it look really clean. And you can kind of see exactly what your flow is, 1, 2, and then 3. And so I made the text the same as all of our other sections. I added headings because she's got 2 sections in there. She's got her research questions and projects. I changed the order in her title so they both showed up in the same way. Updated the table to use the same colors that we're using throughout the rest of the poster. Changed the text, and that was about it. I'm going to let this just finish up.
And here is our final product, the final finished made over poster. Toggling back and forth, I hope you can see the difference between these posters. A little bit more white space, a little bit easier to read, but now that we've also gone through the content, hopefully it's the right content that is being emphasized on the poster as well, so your eye is drawn to really the core parts of Hannah's work. And so hopefully that was made it better, and it'll make it easier for her to present and have other people understand her research at Student Research Symposium.
Okay, we're going to run into our second poster. So we've got Emma, and she has a poster that she's going to share with us, and I'm going to give her the fuzzy mic again.
So this poster is of my dissertation research. I'm defending it on Friday. And so I have like 300 pages that I'm trying to condense. So this is going to be really helpful, I can tell. So basically, what my study is looking at the role that the school leader or principal plays in student mathematics achievement, specifically through the lens of complexity theory. So my conceptual framework has me modeling a school as a complex adaptive system, which is allowing for us to look at all the interactions that are happening between various stakeholder groups and how those influences are then influencing the school leader, and then how that's influencing the decisions and actions they're taking to try to change student mathematics achievement at their school. So basically, I used an explanatory sequential mixed methods design. So I collected quantitative data, survey data from school leaders throughout the state of Utah, and then I used qualitative focus groups with school leaders from 3 different groups. Those who were school leaders from schools who were performing higher than their demographics would suggest, school leaders who were from schools performing about where their demographics would suggest, and school leaders from schools performing lower than their demographics would suggest. And I utilized those focus groups to help try to explain the survey data that I had. So what I do here is, and I also came up with a predictive model based on school leader characteristics that would predict student SAGE scores for their school. So this reports on my model that's predicting student scores, and I found interaction effects and multiplicative looping effects, which have to do with complexity theory. And then I also found differences in the way that different stakeholder groups were influencing the school leader, depending on whether they were performing higher as expected or lower than their demographics would suggest. And then I was able to answer the question, basically, what is the role if you want to outperform your demographics? So.
All right, thank you. So there is a lot on Emma's poster, and it's all great stuff, but I think what I spent most of the time doing is trying to make some of those hard sacrifices, as far as you've got a lot of text on here, we want to blow some things up, we want to adjust white space. So what is it that we highlight, and what is it that we get rid of? So the first thing that I did, here's one thing. Chances are you've downloaded something like this from postertemplates.com or wherever it is. Don't do it. It gives you bad, in the instructions, it gives you bad info. You see people that do flanking logos with their title in the middle. Everyone does it. It's bad design. Also, it tells you text size. It says adjust the text to how much you have to put in there, which is wrong. You have to change the text to an existing size that is readable. So there's lots of the mistakes that are made in posters are not entirely your fault. You're getting bad information when you're downloading some of these templates. And I may be a little bit strong and opinionated that way, but that's the hill I'm gonna die on. So one thing that I tried different from Hannah's is I started from scratch. So I actually created a new thing from scratch. For that question, I just barely set up the document size, but that's the thing that you do when you begin starting with a new thing. Now I have to do the guides again. It's a pain, it's dumb, but it's well worth your time. So I'm doing the math, trying to figure out how to create 4 columns and put them in there. And then I brought in the beginning, I just started copying pieces at a time, so it became a little bit more manageable to deal with one thing in a little bit. I started choosing fonts and colors and kind of getting a sense just with a couple elements on the screen what we might want to use. You'll notice one thing that I did is Emma's title is a lot shorter, and that's so you can make it so it's the dominant feature on the screen. And I think that in the rest of the poster, she talks about the methods that she uses and how she's looking at that. Maybe it's the right choice, maybe it's not, but all of a sudden, it becomes very easy to be walking past the poster and take 2 seconds and know generally what topic that poster is about. Okay, next thing, so that's what I did there, number 5, using simple, interesting, and descriptive titles and subheads. Now the next thing that I looked at is starting to set up kind of a schema for how I want to set up things here. And this becomes the start of kind of a big idea that I was really excited about for Emma's poster. So you'll notice that Emma, she's got it's kind of a 2-sided project. You've got quantitative and qualitative. And the way she has it in her original poster is she's got like quan results and qual results. And I'm not super smart, so I'm like, what is this? Is this? And then I'm like, oh, it's qualitative and quantitative. So I really tried to structure a way to make it easy, not just with the words, but with the colors and the design to be able to distinguish between the quantitative study and the qualitative study. So I did a couple things. I started pulling things in and doing lots of the things that we talked about, using our fonts, using our tabs, being able to make the text the way we want it to be, so you've got things indented, you've got spacing between your paragraphs, so that it makes sense that way. I changed the font a couple times to decide what I thought looked best. I adopted a color scheme, so I had a few different colors on my palette to draw from, and started applying those. Then this is where we got into, then I realized right here I wanted to really find a way that if you're not going to read all of that first paragraph of Emma's poster, that you're going to see, oh, there's 2 parts to this study. So I created a pinkish, maroonish, quantitative schema, and then a kind of green quantitative and pink qualitative. So all of a sudden, and that repeats, you'll notice that repeats out through the whole poster. The next thing that I did is I added, I kind of combined and restructured some of her paragraphs so that I could introduce the project a little bit earlier on. So I did a little bit of rewriting, a little bit of tweaking. I wanted to bring the participants into the research design. So I created not a bullet or a diagram, but actually a table to be able to help pull those out so you can see and jump to exactly what those participants are. A table sometimes we think about just for reporting numbers, but tables are really powerful things that you can use for words as well. And so this way, what it does is it starts aligning like items. So it creates relationships, not just between the 3 items that we have in the qualitative study, but you can also easily see as we put a quantitative one in there, you can see the relationship between those as well. And so I color code the qualitative with the qualitative, pink and gray, and then I do the same thing for the quantitative. And we'll just go fast and do that. And once you have them, it's easy to copy, paste, and put them in there. And so add that, put that in, and so all of a sudden I've got my first column basically done. And then that sets up the way I want to do this. I forgot to turn on my screen capture, but essentially next what you'll see is I was organizing the content into clear sections, and instead of going column, 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 the way the template has you do, I created 2 broad sections, the qualitative and the quantitative section. And so you can see that right here as I set it up. And then I also added a section for the mixed results. And using those same colors. This projector is horrible, so it's not showing you the colors the way that they are on your paper. But all of a sudden it becomes easy to see that this relates to this relates to this. And you can navigate across the poster a lot easier. Then this is another way that I used a table to work with text. So we had bullet points in the original one. Sorry, that's super fast. One thing when working with a table is, I was talking about with Hannah's, is that sometimes the spacing can be hard and you bump right up against that and that doesn't look great aesthetically. So it's good to know how to edit and work with your tables. We all know how to highlight font and choose those. You can change the colors just the same way that you change shape colors, which is worth knowing and understanding. But the big thing is if you go to your table layout tab right here, I can create a wider margin and all of a sudden this nudges over. You can also put in an exact value if you need it more than that. Okay, so the place where I spent the most time on Emma's poster was on the graphs that she had. I don't know if it was the right sacrifice. I took away the regression analysis. Is that what it was? I couldn't read it. I didn't understand it. It went. So what I focused on was this. And so this is the same type of thing. We've got all of this information at the bottom, and you've got these that you know what they mean, but I don't know what they mean. So I've got to go here and say MTL39. What does that mean? So I have to scroll through here, figure it out. Oh, MTL39 values. Strongly disagree with cooperative working grades K through 9, neutral about cooperative working grades. And so it takes a little bit of time to figure out what is this graph actually trying to tell me. Now this was not editable, this is in a PowerPoint version. It probably came out of R, I don't know.
It was out of Excel.
Yeah, made it as a picture. So I started from scratch on this graph and it really didn't take that much time. I didn't have the exact values though, so I just kind of guessed, but it was pretty close. So here's the process that I went through. You can kind of see I'm looking at it, trying to figure it out. I put both of the PowerPoints on a single screen so I could see both of them at the same time, and then worked on creating a new chart. So create a chart, go to your line, select it, and then I just started putting in values. But then instead of putting state ledge 2-1, state ledge 2-3, I actually went here, looked up what their value is, and put those in the Excel data itself. It doesn't take a lot of time, but all of a sudden it creates a huge amount, it releases a huge amount of work from the viewers, or from the readers themselves. And so we're doing the work so that they can see exactly what it is. I started by trying to figure out what the title was. So it's a long title. There's a lot going on in there. One thing that it does, I tried to figure out, oh, maybe I put 2 different ideas on 2 different lines. Maybe that works well. But the one thing that I noticed as I started creating titles for each of the axes is this is an axis, and this is a series. So this is your x-axis. This is your series of the different lines that you have there. So if they are listed already in there, then you can simplify the title and they can figure out just by reading the extra amount of text. And that reduces repetition and it gives you a little bit more space to work with. And we need it a lot. You'll notice even in the reprint that the text is probably smaller than what I'd like. It's smaller than a 32 point. But we started putting those in there and all of a sudden making this a little bit more understandable and readable. I spent a lot of time just going on and seeing what happens when I change all of these chart elements. Do I need a legend? Do I really need a legend? Do I really need a y-axis? How do I want to structure the scale on my y-axis? It's really worthwhile to just go down each one of those and say, is this element exactly how I want it? Because the more work that you do on that end, the less work that the reader has to do. So I added a legend. I moved the legend over here to make this a little bit more square instead of long and narrow so you can see the relationship a little bit more, and that put it together. the thing that's nice about that is all the formatting that I did not have to redo when I redid the graph again. And so I did it super fast, made those changes. I'm not going to spend and go through and all the time that I spent doing that. But it was just the same process. Okay, so then creating intuitive flow with modular layouts. I was spending a lot of time. It was really interesting to see those relationship models that Emma had put together. I'm still not sure I gave them enough space, but I tried to make them stand out and make them easy to scroll through all the different pieces of information that are in the qualitative results. So we move things around to try and make try to make this a square and try to make this a square. That's really important to make a poster look, create a flow of knowing where to look next. So instead of 2 columns, I turned this into 3 columns to accommodate those 3 different versions, lower, as expected, and higher. And we just started putting those things in there. These are super long titles, so you'll notice that I cropped those out and try and make it a lot simpler. And make some sacrifices on the words that we use. And the text is also tiny. And then I just do different things to the text to create clear size heading and hierarchy. So I use the tables again because we do that. So that's kind of like the thing with Emma's. And so that creates one portion of that long block of text that sticks out. Reduce the words on it so that you can kind of see there's a lot of stuff going on here, but what's the summary? That's the summary. We add the extra little captions to it that Emma had, and then add just a couple little extra things to the text to make lots of different opportunities for you to jump into. It's called multiple points of entry, where you can say, okay, this is interesting. You can either look and go through all of the level 1 headers. You could look at the images, which will catch your eye. You can view these main ideas. And then we also show the differences with bulleted list, bolded text, and then bolded text within the bulleted list. All in the same fonts, still in the same families, still the same sizes, but it does create a lot of variation with the text so you don't just have long paragraphs. And then the rest of this, reducing text length. So after putting together these 3 columns, I've got a lot of content left to put in. I'm not sure that I chose the right things to put at the very end, but after reading, I chose to add the overall results, and I chose to add, what was the other thing? The discussion. I really, really tried to cut down on everything that was in the discussion. So instead of calling it discussion, almost all of the first line of those bullet points is this research supports. So I changed that to the heading, and then I was able to take out 5 or 6 words on each of those bullet points. Now, this is, I don't know, I think that you need to go with your discipline standards as far as to what extent you need to do your sourcing on your posters. There was a lot of sourcing on Emma's posters. If it is vital, then keep it on. But if you can get rid of it, you save a lot of space, especially if you have your references available and ready, like in a printed paper or whatever else, so if people want to know. If you're just referencing other people and it doesn't seem like you're taking credit for someone else's work, that would be my recommendation, because this poster is meant to be a visual aid and not like your thesis or paper. And I spent a long time saying, is this the stuff that needs to stay off? I don't know, but those were the decisions I made. When Emma goes back, she might make some different decisions. But based on what I could read and what I could understand, this seemed like a pretty decent overview of what we had.
And here is the comparison between the 2 posters, toggling back and forth. Hopefully you'll be able to see that this is much more readable, something that you could tackle, understand, be able to see the overall scope of.
Thank you, everyone. We need a round of applause one more time for Emma and Hannah. They were great. I will send you these so you can have them, and they're your take-home prizes. And then also, I will be here. I will stay after to answer any questions, but it is 1 o'clock on the dot, and we are done. So thank you.